Welcome, panelists. Let me introduce everyone first. Let me go from the far end. We have Ryan Jenkins. He is a professor of philosophy and associate director of the Ethics and Emerging Sciences group at Cal Poly. His work examines the ethical impacts of emerging technologies, including AI, on human values and social life. Then we have Giselle. Giselle Cortez is a mathematics student at Cal State Fullerton who works on AI-powered tools to support student career readiness. She brings a student perspective on bias, equity, and responsible AI design in education technologies. Next, we have Tricia Bertram Gallant. She's the director of Academic Integrity Office at Triton Testing Center at UC San Diego and a leading expert on academic integrity in ethics in higher education. Her work focuses on how institutions can rethink integrity, learning, and assessment in the age of generative AI. Julia Powles. Julia Powles is a professor of law, executive director of UCLA's Institute of Technology, Law and Policy, and tech policy lead at UCLA DataX. Her research focuses on AI governance, privacy, intellectual property, and the legal and political challenges of data-informed technologies. Last but not least, Xiaolei Ren. Xiaolei is an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at UC Riverside. His research explores the environmental, societal, and public health impacts of AI systems, including their energy and resource usage. Please welcome my panelists. So we're talking ethical issues today, and you may think of a few which were mentioned a moment ago, but there are many. And I'm going to sort of prime you for a second before we get into our first question. Here are some ethical considerations for all of us to be considering. There's climate and the environment, labor, privacy and data security, equity and accessibility, intellectual property and copyright, plagiarism and academic integrity, bias and accuracy, social and psychological impact, transparency, accountability and ownership, misuse by bad actors. We will not be talking about every single one of these in the next 50 minutes. However, we all have a lot of really big concerns, and we also don't all agree. And that's part of our ethical issues, is we don't all agree. So let's go to the first one. Julia, what's one belief about AI ethics in higher education that you hold but don't hear expressed often, or that you think people are reluctant to say out loud?
All right, so I might kind of kick off in response to the panel discussion we just had. And, you know, one of the things that for me defines being in an environment that is focused on education is that we are really attuned to evidence as our touch point. And so I think the thing for me that feels really under-discussed is the history of EdTech, its delivery for the promises of personalised education and the advantages it will deliver. The impact of the pandemic showed that really there was a great diminution in educational quality when we were fully remote, when we were relying on digital technologies. So for me, is the evidence corresponding with the message of universities, which to me is really a message that responds to power dynamics and the power dynamics of the firms that are pushing the sell very hard on AI technologies, companies that have a pretty checkered history when it comes to public institutions and services, and the long-term and short-term costs. And here, I really think there's such an opportunity for educational institutions to have a bit more muscle than I'm seeing. So systems like across California, I mean, there is no better instance of coordinated public education power that should be leveraged. And instead we see what we've seen for companies like Uber and Google over time, cheap early sell of technologies to infiltrate very stable systems like health and education, with then a ratchet that comes after you've lost a lot of expertise and internal control. So I love examples like Triton GPT. There's so much we could do with technology if we brought it back in the hands of public institutions and not that concentrated set of actors. I think really as people in public education with different priorities to just pure wealth generation, we should bring some of our values to wrestle with what we want for this technology for ourselves.
So, Tricia, I know we've talked about tensions, and Julie brings this up. Can you speak a little more about the tensions that we're in with all of these ethical issues?
Yeah.
And
I mean, so ditto to what Julia said. There's a lot of tensions in our values. So you mentioned values, and we like to talk about ethical values like honesty, respect, responsibility, trustworthiness. They are what we call the fundamental values of integrity. And yet they sometimes come into tension with other values like access, for example, or privacy or equity. I fear, though, that most often we treat them as if they're in opposition. So let's take access and integrity for a moment. And so we talk about digital tools and online education as improving access. And so when we had the pandemic and we had to go remote really fast, there was the question of, but how do we maintain integrity? And we didn't like the answer, which was EdTech, which was remote proctoring services, because of violations of privacy and some equity issues in terms of students with disabilities, people of color, and so on, right? So we were faced with this. And what happened was we pretty much said, okay, no proctoring. And what happened? Well, students cheated. They offloaded their learning, not because they're evil folks, but because the temptations were too high. We were so focused on survival, getting things done, just working through a pandemic, right? And I really do think we're smart enough to find solutions. Rushworth Kidder calls them trilemmas. So instead of seeing access and integrity as pitted against each other in opposition, as a dilemma where we have to choose one over the other, I really think we're smart enough to find the trilemma in that and find the third solution that upholds both of those values. And so I'd like to see us in this AI world that's even brought this more to the forefront to really think about how do we uphold all of our values, even if there's sometimes intention, it even means we have to do a very tricky balancing act.
Ryan, you want to chime in there?
Yeah. So it's great. I was just sort of mulling over this question of how you split the difference between these competing values. This is one of my areas that I find really fascinating and interesting, because for a long time I'd teach technology ethics, and I'd say things like, so as you can see, security and privacy conflict with one another. Good luck out there. And now in the last several years that I've come across a lot of literature that's really helpful and instructive on balancing value conflicts. I mean, one example of this might be something like a tool that a lot of our instructors have started using, which is requiring students to turn in their essays on Google Docs. And the reason that you do that is because you can scrutinize the history of keystrokes in Google Docs. So you can tell if the paper was copy-pasted in one fell swoop, or if it was created iteratively like the assignment might require them to. Now, it's not a perfect solution, because you're requiring students to give some of their data over to Google, perhaps. It's also not a perfect solution because you could game that by copy-pasting a sentence at a time if you were really devoted to plagiarism. However, it does buttress the value of integrity that we care about, right? It provides us some insight into whether the student was cheating and the kinds of ways that we're most worried about one-shotting an essay. And it does so without compromising, I think, their most serious privacy concerns, as opposed to something like a browser that requires them to keep their webcam on while they're taking an exam and flashes a warning if they leave the screen or look away from the screen or something obnoxious like that, which is just shocking to me that people would think that that's an okay way to treat a student who's an adult. And so exposing information about the history of their keystrokes is not sensitive information, right? It's not the same as having your picture captured by a webcam. And so here's a way that restores a significant amount of integrity to the process, and does so in a way that's auditable and transparent and accountable without prying open their personal life, or without catching a view of what their bedroom looks like, or what their house looks like, or something like that. So there are solutions. Tricia, I'm glad you said that there are creative solutions out there for thinking about how to balance these things, how to find the third way, and how to find solutions that meet the thresholds that we care about, in this case, for both integrity and access and respecting privacy at the same time. And to do all of that in a way that's not just technically feasible and easy to deploy at scale, but is also ethically defensible.
So let's get the student perspective here. So there's a lot of pressure regarding AI, and there's a lot of confusion regarding AI. So we hear a lot about opting out. So what would you say to a student or faculty who wants to opt out of AI use altogether because of concerns about, for example, the environment or psychological impacts?
So I think I'd like to first and foremost start off by saying, like, I understand the concerns. The concerns are valid. You know, talking about labor and, you know, who's building these models that we're using, what information are we giving these models? I think they're all valid things to be worried about or afraid of. And I mean, I've heard peers myself say, you know, I'm just not going to use it at all. And I, quite frankly, don't think that that is the right way to go. As the chancellor was mentioning before, I like the point that he kind of made out that we have to adapt. We have to find creative new ways to adapt to the new technology, because the reality is that it's here. Kind of going back to the question before, what's something that institutions talk about or something that you don't really hear them talk about? Whenever I hear AI, the first thing that comes to mind is academic integrity, right?
Yes.
But
The original.
something I don't feel that we hear enough of is the inequality that there is behind that. I feel like these tools, ChatGPT, whatever AI software students are using, can bring a lot of benefits to higher education that we don't talk enough about. For example, I myself am a woman studying applied mathematics, and sometimes I walk into a classroom and I'm one of 3 girls. And so it's a little intimidating, especially because I'm Hispanic and being raised in a Hispanic household, you know, the women are a little quieter. So I'm not the first to speak up or have an answer when there's a problem on the board, and my peers are, and sometimes that can be a little intimidating. But with AI, I've happened to ask my instructors for the notes ahead of time, for example, and I'll go through the notes myself. If I have questions, I can ask AI. And then I've also had another amazing instructor who's taught me not to completely trust AI all the time. Sometimes it can give you incorrect answers. And so being able to just strengthen those relationships with professors and going to their office hours to make sure what I'm reading on ChatGPT is accurate, but also going into class now more confident, because now I'm aware of what the professor's talking about, and now I'm not as afraid to ask questions. So I feel that these are tools that we should be talking about. I don't think it's something that we should completely opt out of, because there are many students like myself that go to these higher institutions in their first gen, or they're, you know, dealing with housing crisis or dealing with unhealed trauma, and these tools are very beneficial to students like that.
So we do hear students being extremely concerned about climate and the environment and not wanting to use these tools, potentially opting out because of the climate impact. So Charlotte, I know that you've done some work on this, some research on this. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think just like everything else, AI computing or data centers in general do have a climate impact. But overall, I think if you compare the climate impact of AI, or basically focus on the resource consumption side, is not really high compared, or I would say much lower than many other industries. So I don't think it's really fair to make people feel guilty of using AI just for the environmental concerns. It is a concern that we need to understand, address it, and make it better. Of course, that's important. But on a per model or per user basis, it's not the reason that we should be rejecting the use of AI just because of this. I think more important or more significant challenge in many cases of building data center system is the infrastructure, the power infrastructure, the water infrastructure. You know, the U.S. power grid is struggling with meeting the demand of new electric load like data centers. And also many of the rural communities are having really outdated public water system. And those systems were built like several decades ago, even more than 100 years ago. They were not designed, never designed to accommodate this such industry scale demand. And data center water demand is actually very spiky. You know, if you look at the overall usage, they could be low, but during the summertime, that can be 10 times as much as the regular average usage. And the water system needs to be designed to handle that peak, which many small community systems are not having the financial resources or technical capacity to address. So I think this is the challenge, real challenge faced by the infrastructure planner, by the individual communities. But at the same time, because I'm an engineer, I like to have these type of engineering challenges, and that means we're going to be building more system to accommodate the needs. There can be new corporate community partnership to help build out this newer, modernized water infrastructure, power infrastructure, not only benefiting the data center project, but also the whole community. I think to summarize the environmental, like climate and maybe the water, it is an important issue to understand, to address. But for individual users, I think we should be it should be fine if you are using it for good purposes. Of course, generating fake information, that's a totally different story.
Julia, would you like to?
Look, I mean, I think that I come from a very drought-stressed part of the world, and it's no joke, the impact that much of our modern life has on our environment, and I think that it's a very accelerated demand that's come from data centres. There's abundant evidence on that in terms of the power, energy and water demand. I think it's part of the calculus, and there can be this challenge of, the critique is made on those who are concerned about AI that any one of these issues, perhaps in itself, may be a reason that we can contest. But I think the composition of these labour issues, equity issues, environmental issues, they require examination, not even necessarily at an individual level, but what are we doing to respond to them? And I helped advise the two governments that are looking at AI in education. And what really struck me is how much the responsibility, we talk about ethics and responsibility, falls on individuals to resolve issues that are beyond any one individual. So yes, just like the climate footprint was an idea put out there by big business to try to make this an individual burden rather than a systemic burden, I think as a system, we do really need to face the fact that this is a direction against what has been a sustained examination of modern life and its environmental impact, and it's going the wrong direction for sure. So is the trade-off, we had the trucking example, I think that's a very compelling one to think about. Yes, you could cost it out, but it is manifestly different to drive a truck across a drought-stressed country where it has to compute its environment at all times to having an individual. And you could say, well, an individual has a certain amount of environmental output. They do, but we're not discussing whether we can remove individuals from the planet. So I think we've got to really be pretty real about the calculus that we're making, and I think ultimately what does it serve to replace something that is also a viable way and a sustainable way to do various activities that doesn't have that same burden.
So we talked, in the Fireside Chat, they talked a bit about corporations and their need to make money and how that is affecting our students and what we do. And I was wondering, we see corporations trying to help the environment, by doing things for the infrastructure. They're putting millions of dollars into ways to keep their AI data centers going. So I'm wondering what we think about that and AI helping us with the environment. How do we? What are some concerns or thoughts, or what comes to mind, Ryan, when I say that?
Yeah. I would like to echo the things that have been said up here already about the environment. It's a systemic problem, as Julia put it. And for someone like me, I'm very deeply concerned about the environment. But I also recognize that, wagging our finger at users for using ChatGPT is a little bit like telling people to stop using plastic straws and do your part for the climate, which is a total crock, right? I mean, there's a couple dozen people in the world who have the power to just flip a switch and make 90% of this problem mitigated. And when people down here that have very little power to change it get in this kind of circular firing squad, it's extremely counterproductive, and it's a huge distraction. I think that energy should be spent pressuring the powers that be and the people that actually have power to make change here. So let me ask, quick show of hands, anyone fly here? Yeah, you emitted much more carbon on that flight than you will in a lifetime of ChatGPT use, period. That's it. I flew here from San Luis Obispo, 55-minute flight, up, down, awesome, Alaska Airlines. They don't pay me to say that, great flight. Great flight. Super short flight, that was about 60,000 ChatGPT queries. That's 10 times a day for 16 years. So that's, and we do that kind of thing without thinking twice about it. And so we shouldn't lose sleep over, you know, should I be running a local model to reduce my carbon impact? That's a huge distraction, huge distraction. So when you talk about using AI to help the climate, this is often bundled together with a lot of the other kinds of utopian visions of what this technology is going to do. It's going to solve climate change. It's going to cure every disease. It's going to discover, you know, new technologies for this, that, and the other thing. And I guess color me skeptical. You know, we're a people that have been sold this story about our salvation always being just over the horizon in the next generation of tools and chemicals and machines and what have you. And that's a quote from Langdon Winter from 1980. So we're still hearing that story here almost 50 years later. And if you ask me, the answer is simple. Those problems will get solved when it is profitable for someone. And if it's not profitable to cure a specific disease, people are not going to put money into it. And it's as simple as that. So if you want to know, I mean, I think one suggestion, I'm not really a math guy, but one suggestion might be to require a kind of quota or a kind of overhead on data center use. 0.5% of your gigawatts have to be devoted to public service or public good applications. Just go, yeah, yeah. I'll take that. Yeah. All right, that's one. So you know, surely, I mean, you know, NVIDIA, $4.5 trillion, OpenAI is just gobbling up tens of billions of dollars. Are you telling me they can't spend a tiny bit, a fraction of a % of compute on chemical discovery, drug discovery, things that might be loss leaders for them, or at least things that might be cost centers for them, I should say? I think that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, if we're taxing them at 20% or we're taking 15% of their corporate income anyway, why not lower their taxes and apply some sort of compute tax or something like that? If they're going to be imposing so many other costs on society, let's compensate society by requiring them to devote some of their resources to pro-social goods.
Can I build on?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. We didn't click because we think it should be a greater percentage.
Sure.
So this is so important because what Julia and Ryan both touched on is called intentional entanglement, right? You know, we give it away for free, especially to students. Then we tell educators, it's out there, they're using it anyway, so you gotta figure it out, sorry. You know, actually, they don't say sorry. So right now, there's a movement, or at least maybe, hopefully we're trying to start a movement of saying, well, wait a second, yes, our education system's not perfect. It is built on 19th century model of the Carnegie credit hour. It has arbitrary rules like 3-hour finals and 50-minute midterms because you happen to have the 50-minute class schedule Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? So there's lots of stuff we can fix. No one's denying that, I don't think. But do we really need to fix the fact that Perplexity put out a product called Comet, gave it away to all the students with EDU addresses for free, started advertising to them to let the agent do the work for them, and it allows the agent to go into the LMS system like Canvas and complete work for students, and LMS systems are like, sorry, nothing we can do about it. Is that really what we want, right? And then it says, well, you have to redesign all your work. But I know that frequent, small, mastery-based quizzes can help students learn. There's learning science that backs it up, and now you're telling me I can't do that anymore because you don't want to stop this agent from getting into the LMS. That's what we're talking about here. Do we own some of the problems? Yes. Do we own all of them? No. And as a collective, we could be saying, we don't want that tool in our environment. We want to create narrowly, specifically trained tools that can actually help students learn. I meet with a lot of students who are not using it the way you're using it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we do need to leverage our collective agency, as you were talking about, to really stand for something instead of just saying, well, I guess we have to adjust.
So we teach the future, if you think about it, in higher ed. And we wonder, when it comes to all of these ethical issues, Giselle, I'm gonna toss this to you. What do you think society should really be afraid of when it comes to AI? And what do you think higher ed's role should be in addressing it?
So I think something we should be afraid of is we should really take into account who's creating these models, who's profiting off of these models, who is gathering all this information with these models. I think that is something that's really important that we should be aware about. I don't believe that, again, the idea is to completely opt out of it or to remove it from higher education, because then you don't learn those things. I myself, I'm 24 years old. I went back, took a break from school and came back. And when I came back, AI was new. And I was like, what is this? My peers were using it. I myself wasn't aware. I had one history of mathematics class where we did integrate it into our work. Our professor, taught us about the AI, when it was appropriate to use it, when it wasn't appropriate, skills to use with it, how to use it, and think critically with it, right? That was kind of game changer for me, because the more I paid attention to it, the more I realized it's already out there, past higher education. I have friends, I'm 24, a lot of my friends have already graduated, some of them software engineers, telling me that their bosses are asking them, oh, have you checked on ChatGPT if your code is correct? I can't imagine finishing school and being behind or different than my peers, already at a disadvantage because I didn't learn what I needed to learn when I was in my higher education. So another thing that comes with that, yes, there's all these bad things that come with AI, the environment, right? We all care about the environment. But at the same time, how do we expect to make changes or policies on how we can use AI, or just these changes that need to be made with this if nobody's educated on it, especially the people that we want educated on it, like the next generation that is going to college. It's already out there. If we completely decide, hey, let's not let college students use it, the rest of the world is going to use it either way. So I think it's important for us to use it, practice it, learn it, and maybe a part of the problem, right, or fixing the problem would be to hold like professional development for faculty on how to teach how to use AI, or how to show this to your students, how to not let your students be afraid of this, because it's going to be there. I don't think the answer to handling AI is purity and abstinence. I think it's just teach them how to do it, right?
Let me follow up on that. So, how should higher education teach AI literacy and AI fluency to their students? Whose responsibility is it from your students' perspective? Where do you want that to fit into your education?
So, for example, in that history of mathematics class, I think it was integrated perfectly, right? We still had to do our own writing assignments. We still had to do our own research in that class. We still learned about the history of mathematics. But again, we were shown when, if we wanted to, we weren't mandated to use it. We were shown when we could use it at points of that lecture, right? Examples including, like, for example, if we went over a topic about like history of mathematics, a particular person, and I had more questions about it when I went home and studied, I can just ask ChatGPT, hey, I want more information on this. I don't know if that's totally accurate, but again, being able to go to that professor and building relationships. I've never built as much relationships with professors as I have now that I use AI regularly, because it just kind of makes it less scary. And so as a student, I really appreciated my faculty showing that they cared about my education enough to give us a new tool to make us feel less intimidated by everything that comes with going to higher education. So from a student's perspective, it was very valuable for me to gain that from a professor.
So faculty have many perspectives on AI use in the classroom. And so we know that there's no AI, a little AI, a lot of AI. So I go back to, for the panel, who's responsible, in your opinion, to try and prepare, if students need to be prepared with AI literacy, if they're going to walk into the job market and have somebody say, how would you do this with AI? Or if they're going to see deep fakes and misinformation in the political, so to be good civically engaged. You know, we're trying to teach the future. So whose responsibility, or what does that look like?
I'd like to add on to that point specifically. Last summer, I actually got to travel out of state in New Jersey. I lived there for 2 months and helped tutor high schoolers that were learning math. And these students are from an underrepresented community, and they got to spend the whole summer at a college campus, away from their parents, on campus, actually taking classes and then doing fun camp activities. I had multiple students there that did not speak English. So learning math when you don't speak English can be a little tough, especially when it's high school math and there's a lot of word problems. Specifically, I had these students from Egypt. They had just came here, had no idea, and they felt so intimidated by the course. One of them I caught using ChatGPT, and when I confronted him about it, right, because again, the first idea is always no, bad, he was telling me that he was using it to translate the word problems because he couldn't understand them. And that to me, students spend pretty much until I'm 24 in schools. We spend more time at school sometimes than we do at home, especially when we have unstable homes. And so I believe that's where the idea for me that it does kind of fall on the school systems and the universities and even high schools. I mean, kids these days have phones. I also work at Verizon, and a lot of parents come in and I want to buy my 7-year-old a phone, and I'm like, why? But it happens. It's a part of our world now, and I feel that ignoring that is just going to cause a lot more problems in the long run.
Tricia?
So I have the answer.
Oh.
You're welcome. So each individual instructor should not have to become an AI literacy coach. We don't all teach how to use Word or Excel or SPSS packages or any other tool, right? So as an institution, we have to teach students about artificial intelligence, generative AI in particular. We have to teach them how it works under the hood, because the kids I meet with that misuse it have no clue how it works. And once they learn it, they're like, well, I used it, that's the stupid way I used it, because that's not the right way, right? So we do owe it to our students to teach them how it works, when they should use it, if they should use it, why they should use it, getting them to think critically about it, right? I do think we confuse people by labeling things: information literacy, digital literacy, AI literacy. There's critical thinking. And so we owe it to our students to do that. Then within departments or programs, I think the faculty need to figure out, how does Gen AI impact our discipline? How does it impact our field out there in the world? Or how does it impact the world? And so how are we then going to scaffold it into our curriculum? What are our foundational courses that students need to learn, like the multiplication tables? I don't know. What are their foundational concepts? They need to learn those, and we need to validate their learning without the use of AI tools to make sure they have the foundational knowledge, which would then allow them to ethically, responsibly, and intelligently choose when to offload to the tools. But how, the econ faculty, what they teach students do with AI is going to be very different than what the bio faculty teach, right? And so letting the faculty figure that out for their discipline, and let the institution handle the bigger literacy or fluency or whatever label we're giving it these days problem.
Can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we had a convening a lot like this at Cal Poly in the fall, and one of the panels that we had was on AI and teaching specifically, and it actually did a lot to assuage my anxieties about it, because one of the panelists said, just talk to your students about AI. I mean, treat them like adults who can make decisions and can understand how the system works and so on. And I think there was a suggestion there, which was to give them an assignment to have a conversation with GPT about something that you're an expert in. So it doesn't, obviously not the class material, but Taylor Swift or the 49ers or whatever you're a fanatic about. And so I gave my students this assignment, and I asked them to rate the quality of the answers and then reflect on how this experience might change their plan for how they use it in school. And it was very enlightening for me. And first of all, there were a lot of students who were already saying, like, I already don't use it very much. I'm already kind of wary of it. But there were many students that pointed out surprising mistakes that it would make. So if you ask it about sports, it might not know that some team made a trade last year and it would get their roster wrong. Or I'll tell you, one thing that was surprising is that the single most common topic that my students probably asked it about was The Office. And I had no idea kids were watching The Office. But many of them pointed out that, you'd ask it about some significant scene in The Office and it would make a mistake about who was in the scene or who the conversation was between or something like that. And I found that surprising until you realize the systems, for the most part, GPT 5.2 or whatever, is trained on a lot more text tokens than it is video tokens. And so there's a lot more information on the internet about, I don't know, the capital of, Mongolia than there is information about every single specific scene in every single TV show or book. And so one of the things that came out of this was this interesting learning experience where, just as you were saying, Tricia, like understanding more about how the systems are built will tell you when they're reliable, when they're not. And if you can start to help students develop that kind of mental model of what the systems are actually doing under the hood, as you put it, I think that that's really helpful. And then you can leave it to them or leave it to the faculty to keep having these conversations about the right way to use it. But I mean, my only regret is that I made all these assignments due on the same day, so I got a stack of 90 of them to grade in the first week, and I was like, why did I always make this mistake? It's up to me when my students turn things in. Why do I always do this to myself?
Just give the grading over to ChatGPT, you'll be fine.
But yeah, so that was the only weakness of the assignment. But it was a kind of affirming and reassuring experience for me, and I also enjoyed having the conversation. Blocking out 30 minutes. I'm loath to give up class time for anything because there's already too much to say in too little time. But I could afford 20, 30 minutes to go over some of the trends that I saw in their responses and tie it to ideas about how the system was built. Now, as you put it, my classes are technology ethics or philosophy of technology, so it makes sense that we would spend a lot of time talking about the technology. Mm-hmm. Other classes, it might not make as much sense, and we want to respect instructors' discretion, of course. But there's just one idea for the faculty in the room or the instructors in the room. That's just one idea that, again, I give you, if you're waiting for someone to say it, you have permission to do an assignment like that, and you might find it a positive experience.
Oh yeah, maybe just
yes, please.
It's not about how I teach AI. I'm not teaching AI. I'm teaching a signal system, which is basically a math class. So I allow my students to use AI for their homework, for their lab reports. The only situation they're not allowed to use AI is during the final and midterm exam, because otherwise I couldn't make any problems for the exams, because all those questions can be answered by the AI. And but since this is a math class and the students still need to know the knowledge because they want to be serving as a problem verifier, because sometimes the AI will be making some crazy mistakes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's how I encourage my students to use AI, except for in the exam.
So what I keep hearing is I redid my assessments and assignments in the era of AI because I have AI literacy. I know enough to put my assignment into AI, see how it would respond, or my assessment into AI, and try and change it, maybe even use AI to change it. So, well, it's a great, I recommend. But, again, I go back to, all of these ethical considerations. You need to know so much in order to teach it well. Whose responsibility? How do we do that? How do we get our faculty trained on all these ethical issues and all these things so that they can then put it out there or have the conversation of no, and this is why. But as opposed to, I'm just not going to deal with it, I'm going to keep doing what I do. But you've got course learning outcomes. You've got student learning outcomes. You've got to get those things taught. Mm-hmm. So I just want to put it out there. What are your thoughts about, what do we do? How do we move forward with all of these wonderful faculty who want their students to get those course learning outcomes and those student learning outcomes taught?
Great.
Yeah, I might reinforce the points Giselle and Tricia made around, I think that we have an obligation if we're going to allow AI use, and I've taught with in sort of demystifying AI for the last decade in my classes in law, because I think lawyers are some of the most prone to thinking this technology can do more than it can. One of the things I find frustrating about AI literacy, I really want to caution about that phrase, I think that's what industry wants us to do in education. And what I'm really noticing in the last 3 years, which differentiates from previously, is a total blurring of the enterprise of the university with the enterprise of corporations, which is, we need to be able to be efficient operators in, as cogs in a machine. And it's entirely different to critical thinking. I absolutely agree with you. Critical thinking is what we want to centre. And, the kind of technologies we're talking about, they're quite a reduction of what AI could be. You may have been hearing me as a tech critic, and I think most of the time we're out there, we're hearing total tech optimism. I'm actually optimistic about a bigger, better vision of technology, like AI that isn't just text extruding machines. And Giselle, I wanted to give this quote from Emily Bender, a linguist who's written a lot on AI, and she points out that when AI is being used either by faculty or students, it's a signal of a resource limitation. So students who don't have enough time, who aren't able to navigate particular understandings or languages, faculty who have too many demands on their time. And so I want us to be able to think of those. And one of the reasons that I think it actually will save the enterprise of public education and public research. So the fact that, how many people who work in the sciences, I started in the bioscience, their whole mission is to work on curing diseases, to be able to understand the scientific mechanisms of illness. And I worry that we're just going to put all of our energy into a set of technologies that have a very linear, frankly, way of thinking about how we can understand things, which is how we've always understood them, and lose any kind of mechanistic understanding of the world, any kind of the serendipity that comes from scientific discovery, that any number of inventions have not followed. They've taken soil out of the, put things back in the ground. When you're studying soil science, suddenly discovered that for 50 years we've been missing a whole bunch of environmental factors because we put them in the lab. Just really basic things that scientists haven't been able to do. And I think if AI is only trained on what we've always done, it will really narrow our ways of thinking as researchers, as teachers. And so I want something that's bigger than AI literacy, because frankly, it's, here are these products and you better get on board. That's what I mostly hear. So I guess to your answer, there are whole schools in education systems that work on socio-technical systems. Langdon Winner, the kind of long history of understanding and interrogating the role of technology in society. And so we need to work in partnership. I love collaborations where you are bringing together different disciplines, where we're thinking with historians and technologists and social scientists who can really help wrestle with these issues. And I would love us to displace that focus that the students are either going to be cheating or they're going to be efficient. I think that's such a deficit mindset. They are adults, they can engage really critically with this, but we do have to listen. I think in a university, if we suddenly say, abandon your concerns about labour and the environment and IP theft on which these technologies are built, everything we value, I think we're really missing such an opportunity for a better future for technology.
And
Yes.
librarians.
Yeah. Thank you.
But we shouldn't be asking faculty or librarians or staff, any staff, to rebuild the plane while we're flying it. So we keep saying, you've got to figure this out. You've got to teach your students. You've got to redesign your courses. Librarians, you've got to figure out how to work with this kind of, information place instead of that information place. If we really want quality teaching that helps students learn, then we should be saying to faculty, we should be putting our money where our mouth is, to your point, and not replacing faculty with AI, but saying, we're going to release you from that course this term so that you can actually work as an instructional designer to redesign your course. We have to do what we're doing at UC San Diego, which is it's getting faculty in a room, training them on it, and then letting them be fellows or ambassadors or experts within their discipline. I always say to faculty, I can only take you so far. I don't teach chemistry. I have no idea how you're going to integrate AI into chemistry or mathematics, right? So we have to give them those skills. We have to give them the time, training and support to get those skills, and then they have to help each other as disciplinary experts. And so I think that's really important that we decide this is what we care about, and we care about humans helping humans and centering the human learning experience, then we're going to do that. I love Triton GPT, but maybe we'll spend some money on that rather than all on the systems or the mechanisms or the ed tech.
Yeah, we talk about humanizing our courses using AI. And people, exactly, what is that? You know, and when we talk about a resource deficit, you know, when we were in COVID and we said, okay, everybody online, and all this money came to help us get people online, to get these classes online, to help you redesign and all of what you needed to do. And then AI comes along, and we didn't create it, like we didn't create COVID, but no money comes. This is a tension that everyone's trying to solve. So for those faculty who are freaking out, we know, you know, I hear from all of the places that I am in, you know, how are we going to take our resource deficit and get you to do what needs to be done to get these course learning outcomes, these student learning outcomes taught, and get these students to be able to go out into the world and use these things responsibly and appropriately and ethically. So I don't know if anyone wants to say anything on that. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I don't think technology can help us humanize things, but I think we can do technology in a humanistic way.
Thank you.
Right? And so just a shout out to the crew at San Diego, because I know I'm a hopeful pessimist when it comes to AI impact on education. I'm a fan of narrowly trained tools. I'm not a fan of these general purpose chatbots. The way we've been rolling out EdTech and Triton GPT in specific, it's about the humans. It's about what do the teachers need? What do the students need? How can we help them? But how can we help them spend more time together rather than replace them, right? And so I think that if we just focus on what added value do our colleges and universities have in an AI-enabled world? It's human-to-human learning experiences. And so how do we use tech to enable that?
Which makes me think of our online instruction. If we say, like we do very much in community colleges, say, you know, we've got students with 4 jobs and 3 children, and they only have time to go to these classes, you know, on times when we can't get them onto campus. You know, there are definite tensions there. So how do we, if we want them to have more we want them to get more durable skills, right? We want them to be able to communicate better. We know that when they go out into the workplace, they're saying, you have to be here 5 days a week. So you're going to need to discuss what you learned in college. You're going to need to make these conversations happen. And yet we've got these online students, and what might be what do we do? How do we, any
I have the answer to that too, but I want to shut up and let somebody else talk.
I mean, I think we need to differentiate the enterprise. I think we've developed really good skills around, if our priority is online education, how to do that well. And I would just call to the people who've been doing that before we had AI for how to have a, you know, really strong pedagogy in that approach. What I worry is that it's environments that haven't had that experience that are doing a bad version of it, just like the emergency online teaching that many did during COVID, which wasn't informed by the same depth of experience. And I just want to, you know, I've been really experimenting with much more embedded experience. I'll just give as an example, there's this wonderful program, Fiat Lux, which has been beneficial for my first year at UCLA. And I've got a class now on cyberpunk in Los Angeles. And it's amazing because there's films like we saw Blade Runner with a live orchestra, and 2 of the class had seen Blade Runner before, but they had such wonderful conversations about some of the rewatching it, some really troubling scenes about engaging with a replicant, you know, which was the language used for a chatbot or Android, and wrestling with their own experience. And then the second, and it's been sitting with me since the opening panel, I just wanted to return to talk about ethical stakes. You know, Chancellor Kozler said about the debates that were had by DARPA in the mid-90s about automated killing and drone strikes. And then we've just got to a world where we have automated killing and drone strikes. And I don't think we had a great ethical resolution. In fact, he said exactly that. And the ethical issues remain absolutely central. So the other film we watched as a class was Sleep Dealer, which, if you haven't seen, is phenomenally prescient from a LA-based filmmaker, Alex Rivera, and it's about the border policing and this idea he explores of what he terms the American ideal of all of the work without the workers, which is autonomous labour run by people on the US-Mexico border. And they observed that all of the cameras that were used to monitor people were also accompanied by machine guns. And I think that we have opportunities in education to experiment with in-person. So that's a class I only have 10 hours contact with them. So we're using it for in-person. And then everything else they're doing is their own exploration, online engagement, much that's the class within themselves. And they're bringing to the surface, I think, the most potent questions of our time. They're bringing in what's happening politically. They're bringing in what do we want to learn? How do we want to embody our values in the world? So I love the opportunity and a system. We should have more classes like FitLux, which are just really easy to put up examples of courses that you teach that are in areas where you can design them and make them of the moment, and students can come to them out of their passion and pursue new lines of inquiry.
I would like to add, talk to your students as well. Talk to them like we're grown-ups as well. I know we're a little young and sometimes we don't know everything, but I mean, living for 18 years with your parents and then moving away for some of us, for example, we still kind of have that mindset of, well, who do I listen to now? But as soon as you tell me, no, don't do that, what does this kid do? They're going to go and do it. they're going to learn. And the thing is, if you have the position where you can just have a communication about it or have a talk about it and what's the right way to use it or what's the wrong way to use it, I think that's like the most basic form of where we can even start talking about AI. But I think that would be the first simplest step that we can take.
So switching gears just a little bit, when we're talking about student-created information, student work, what do you think, panel? Is the solo-authored student essay dead? Should we stop detecting AI use and simply accept it as the new baseline for all academic work? Spicy. Ryan?
Yeah, so I don't think the essay's dead. There was a New York Times op-ed right after GPT was released, so late 22 or something like that, that said the death of the college essay or something like that headline. But recently this distinction was pointed out to me that instructors require students to write for different reasons. And I require my students to write as a form of assessment to make sure that they've captured some of the concepts and they can apply them somewhat ably with some novel ideas. And they do those blue book exams in class, just like the good old days. But there are other classes where students are expected to write for writing's sake or to write to learn to become better writers. Those kinds of classes, I think, are pretty deeply threatened by AI. And there's been a lot of talk about how you can structure your assignments so that they're iterative and that they build on each other, that there are multiple small steps that students turn in and get a lot of formative feedback on earlier. Those teachers that are working on that specific skill, I think, have a little bit more existential angst about what AI means for how you teach. And it's exactly like the teachers that would be teaching students how to do long division, before the pocket calculator comes out. You have to rethink how you're doing it, how you want to train students to do it, rethink the value of the skill. I'm not at all questioning the value of writing. I'm just using that as an analogy. So that's sort of what I would say. Is it the death of the essay? I mean, if you can do essays in class and if you're doing essays for a certain reason with certain kinds of guardrails around them, I think essays are still very valuable. And I enjoy reading my students' essays, and I frequently will crib the things that they say to use as examples in my class. So, just yesterday when I was in class, I was giving some examples that I'd gotten on previous assignments. So it enriches me as well, too, to see my students' novel ideas put on paper. So again, I think it depends what we're writing for. And, really the silver lining of this moment for instructors, I think, is that it is forcing us to rethink from the ground up a lot of what we're doing in the classroom. That's extremely intimidating, And it's extremely time consuming and anxiety producing and all the rest. And I feel it too. I'm a philosopher, right? In late 2022, I showed my students GPT 3.5 and I punched in like that day's quiz and it just gave a competent answer with hallucinated quotations, but it gave a perfectly competent answer otherwise. And their jaws just dropped. So I feel that threat too. It can one-shot my assessments very well. So some of that's going back into in-class assessment. Part of it might be closer working alongside students and collaborating with students to help them develop those skills. And if we value those skills, which I think we do, there's just no way around that, I don't think, right now.
So it's so important to figure out why we were assessing the essay.
Yeah.
Lots of times we overvalue the expression of knowledge through writing. And that's not the expression that all of our students need. I was giving a keynote at a community college conference, and they said, we're developing scholars. And I was like, why? Why? Most of your graduates aren't going to become scholars. What are we really meaning when we say that? What are the underlying skills and knowledge that we really mean when we say that? Let's unpack that and then think about whether essay writing is the right thing for that particular purpose. I also want us to, it's dead if we keep trying to assign it in the same way for the same purposes we did in before and then try to detect cheating. That is a no-win scenario. It's exhausting. It's negatively emotional for faculty and for students. We need to focus on what are the learning outcomes, what is the best way to facilitate the mastery of those learning outcomes, and what is the best way to validate the level of mastery to which those learning outcomes have been achieved. That's the question. And so if the essay fits in there, great. And if it doesn't, get rid of it.
Just real quick, Tricia,
Yeah.
it's funny, I can't help but smirk because I agree with everything you said, and yet, the classes that I teach are required by the CSU to have 2,000 words of graded writing.
So part of the problem.
So I'm kind of in a bind, but I totally
But part of the
agree.
problem, right? The Carnegie Credit Hour.
Yeah.
We have rules that are imposed upon us from the 19th and 20th century that just they're not necessarily relevant anymore. And so it's not just what individual instructors can do. They can only do so much. Yeah. The institution, the system has to figure out where are the things that are causing problems. Like, again, the 3-hour final. When I say to faculty, do you write a 3-hour final? No. And so, but we still call them 3-hour finals, right? So there's so many tropes and that we just have to examine.
Julia?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the, treating students like adults. And I think if an essay is the right item of engagement, and I teach law and policy and its interface with technology, so we do need to be able to write persuasively. I have students read this beautiful essay from Ted Chiang, the science fiction writer, titled, I think, ChatGPT is a blurry JPEG of the internet. And he writes about how when we teach writing, why we teach writing and why we assign essays. And it's not because the world needs more student essays. No. It's to go through the enterprise of being able to write. And he has this line about, one of the things that happens when you write, and I found this myself, when you write in a way that's assisted by AI, it becomes very generic very quickly. And he argues about why it's valuable for students to have the imperfect reflection of an idea and the challenge of trying to transmit that idea through the imperfect medium of language. And that exercise, and he's written on it in subsequent pieces, is something that's very hard to show that you've developed, but out in the world that you haven't developed it. And he says it's kind of, this is the core challenge of these technologies. What they deprive you of is something like doing a gym workout where you can't show, you've got the muscle development. But he said, why, if you really want to develop your mental agility, which is really such a huge part of the enterprise of education, don't bring a forklift to the gym. That's what it is to write with these technologies. And I think that has done wonders. Every class I've had, there will be cases where students are then, they feel the pressure and we have the engagement. And they tend to, by the way, the best thing I've done is also whatever remedy you want to have for when they do decide to lean on these technologies, they set their own penalty. And most students will be far more punishing of themselves around the use, that they know that they deprive themselves of part of the learning experience. So I think that they're able to engage and see, if they can't see the value of the assessment, then we should rethink it. And if they can, and they can think of what they're going to develop that might not necessarily be seen. Most student essays never see a life beyond that. But that's because that's not the purpose of it, ultimately.
I want to add, I like that idea of like that reflection that you guys can have with students or promote students to have themselves. Because I'm a math major, I don't really write. That's why I chose math. But sometimes I do find myself kind of going through that thought process of kind of struggling to formulate like what to write. And I realized that sometimes I do become a little reliant on ChatGPT or these tools, but being able to have those open conversations and those reflections. I've read 4 books last year, and that's something I would have never done, but I did it because I noticed I was struggling to put words together. And I only noticed that because of ChatGPT and just writing these things. I was like, why can't I do this myself? And so I think just having those reflections or those periods of reflections that students can have, either with a mentor or a professor or anybody that, could give them a positive outlook on this, just that reflection is really important.
So what we're hearing from you, though, is a very high level of metacognition. You think about your thinking, and you're very aware. I used it, and then I realized, why am I struggling? Oh my gosh, I gotta read more. I mean, this is what we call a durable human skill, right? That we need to be focused on in this age of AI. And so one thing we do with our students after an integrity violation to help them learn from their mistake is we go through kind of a typical assignment, and we give them the durable human skill wheel, and we ask them to think through, what durable human skill are you developing? You're in this class, this writing class you don't want to be in. It's a gen ed. I'm a math major, don't want to be in there. So you're not really interested in the content maybe, right? So how can I find the why? The motivation, the intrinsic motivation to do the activity the way the professor has designed. It's by being very aware of the durable human skills I might develop, like metacognition, like persistence, like resiliency, struggling through a difficult task, right? And so they find that extremely helpful because they hadn't really thought of it before. And I said, there is a method behind our madness sometimes. When we ask you to do something, it's for a good reason. We're not very good always at articulating those reasons, which faculty have to do a better job at.
So we've given you a lot to think about, and we wonder, what kind of questions do you have for us? We have a few minutes, and we have some mic runners. So what's come to your mind that we have not covered, or that's bubbling up that you're like, help? I've got one here.
I'm Alicia from San Joaquin Delta College, and I was just wondering what Giselle thinks about the blue books that many faculty are now using, because you just talked about using ChatGPT to help you with writing. So what about taking a class where you're allowed to use it, but not for your final?
Okay, so for me personally, again, I don't know if I'm skilled somewhere else that others aren't, but for me personally, for example, I noticed that. So let's say I'm in a classroom where we are expected to have that blue book final, and I know it's coming up, but if my faculty or my professor or mentor is telling me, hey, talking to me about AI, it's made me more aware of how I'm using it and where I'm lacking when I'm using it. I use it more for like resume building and things like that, but in a classroom, if that conversation was had first and foremost before the beginning, hey, you're expected to have this blue book final at the end, you're welcome to use ChatGPT. We'll talk about throughout the course when you shouldn't use it, what you should start thinking about if these problems come up. Then it makes us think, it makes us reflect, it makes us actually sit and think and reflect on how we're using it or where we're lacking as a writer. And then there myself will be like, okay, now I can go to office hours. I know exactly where my problem is. I don't know what that little dash is in these paragraphs.
dash.
Right? So, I would say just having that open conversation and just being honest, straight up with your students.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? Okay, we have another question.
Hi, Emily Magruder from the California State University Office of the Chancellor, and I'm going to direct another question to Giselle because I want to hear so much more about what you've said. You just at the very end there shared a bit about reflection. And we've had a little bit of conversation about where these things should be taught and included in the curriculum. Would you share for us just a little bit more about when, where, and how the reflection happened that led you to read 4 books this year?
Yes, so for me personally, I guess it goes back to understanding that all students come from different backgrounds. Not every student has the same support system, confidence, or even tools when they first step into higher education. Me, myself, like I said, I took a break because it was an immediate, whoa, this is not for me. I was dealing with my grandma who had cancer and I was her caregiver. And so I had to step away from higher education because it was all too much for me. I was handling that, I was handling a job, COVID had just hit. It was too much, I decided to take a step away. I think where the reflection or the inner dialogue comes from is honestly going through those grown-up things and, you know, having life happen to you. For me, I think I gained it more through therapy, right? Having to sit down with someone and actually talk these things out made me realize, wow, I do have an inner dialogue and I do have these thoughts and I can explore these thoughts if I'm just vocal about it. I would not have been that way if it weren't for me getting the help that I needed or really like putting focus on my mental health, which is another big topic when it comes to higher education and the importance of mental health. I will say, going to Cal State Fullerton, my first year, I knew I needed therapy, and it was so difficult to get a hold of through campus. There was only one therapist on campus and millions of students, and it was very hard. I had to go somewhere else, but my reflection or inner dialogue did come from years and years of that self-growth and healing, yeah.
While we're getting that mic over there, that is a whole nother issue that we didn't even begin to touch on is the social impact and people using AI for therapy and AI as companions.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother issue there that that there are positives and negatives of that we could discuss. So next question.
Hi. Thanks for the really helpful discussion. One of the questions I have from the discussion was that that's a famous quote saying that it's not AI will replace you. At least now, it's the human with AI who can use AI better, can replace human who cannot. And the industry reflect that as well. Even though people think programmer will be dead, no. You just feel a programmer, but they still earn as much, even more, with a smaller team, assisted with the cloud code, etc. Same as artists. People think that you don't need to learn how to paint because those image model like Nano Banana. No, you just have less, but a small team can orchestrate much more. So same for the essay writings. So even for academia, there's a science paper talking about how you can use ChatGPT or other Gen AI tools to make your research process more productive. And there's evidence even showing that English as second language scholar, they produce a mass amount of scientific papers since the launch of ChatGPT. So then my question is, so then apparently it's not about teaching just like say essay writing skill. It's AI in essay writing skill. But how should we teach that? How do we evaluate that? Because oftentimes people are citing, oh, AI gonna hallucinate, gonna generate fake reference, need to check. But if you use deep research, the chance of fake reference is very low. And if you compare multiple AIs from competing companies, and the answer is quite different, then it's kind of like you have a different perspective and compare contrast. And students actually got much deeper in the essay. I really enjoy reading much well-written essay, much more deeper thought process with AI. But I'm really grateful for the AI Fast Grant. So I was implementing a huge experiment, and I had first-hand experiences orchestrating 1,000 students, 20 faculties. I'm self-AI expert, but how for majority of faculty during the process, huge attrition rate, because they don't know how can they teach AI in essay writing, AI in the business skills. So what can they do? And how should we do it? Thank you.
Any responses come to mind?
I want to offer a little, I think one theme from a number of speakers this morning has been, you know, you have to integrate it. And I want to offer the opportunity to say you don't have to. I would say my favourite writers, and I've spent a lot of time working with writers and artists around the appropriation of their work illegitimately, without consent and compensation. I love reading them because those ideas are expressed through them as their engagement with the world. I don't think it means that there isn't some other work that others could create, but I think there's some very legitimate applications where you entirely should not be using AI systems. I was a speechwriter for a time. My speeches are really different when I use AI. I don't like them. So I think there's absolutely space not to use it. And one of the challenges I have whenever I hear it from judges say, oh, well, AI is going to replace various roles for lawyers, but they never think it's going to be their role. So there's such a university executives, we're going to have to get on board, but they don't seem to think that it will affect their position. So I always play that back of what are the components that you think matter for your role, and how are we understanding other people's role just to speak to that workforce argument. And what are we missing about what they know? And there is so much knowledge about where AI breaks in practice from the people at the end of these systems. Take any airport terminal and folks who have to deal with automated check-in. I mean, they are stressed out and fixing machines all the time that aren't doing what they say they can do. So we've got lots of knowledge that I think we can draw on to show that we're not yet there. And and there's a role to not always use the systems.
And just as a final thought, we are often thinking of what is going to happen in the future, and it's not here yet. So, for example, software engineers are going to be gone, and yet now we're finding that the software engineers are spending twice as much time correcting what the AI has started at the low level. The next level has to spend twice as much time as they used to spend correcting. So perhaps things are not as they seem. Mm-hmm. So as you carry on considering these ethical questions, do keep in mind that what you hear coming at you is not necessarily what is going to happen or the truth even. And that is our time. Please thank our panelists.